Hello and welcome to the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast, hosted by EFT trainers Michael Barnett, Dr. Silvina Irwin, and EFT supervisor Michael Preston. We are excited to bring you this first season of the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast, Foundations, where Michael, Silvina, and Michael will be breaking down the fundamental elements of EFT, helping to build your confidence as an EFT clinician.
Hello and welcome back to the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast. As always, I am Michael Preston, your host, along with my friend hosts, Michael Barnett and Dr. Silvina Irwin. How are y'all doing?
Good.
2026?
Oh, yeah.
We are in the new year.
We are in a new year.
Good to be back.
Yes, it is good to be back.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a hiatus there. I haven't seen you all going through a little bit of podcast recording withdrawals. And so
Exactly. It's like,
It has.
that's good.
my hang fix.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Very
good to be
good.
back.
That's
Well,
great.
We've got a unique episode today. We're taking a little bit of a detour because we were all fortunate enough to spend some time together in November and at the externship in LA, which was fantastic, and it was a packed house, and what a fun experience just to be with each other in the room and engaging with. 65 people were there. It was just amazing and so engaged, and such an incredible training team that you all have assembled.
Oh, thanks. It was a ton of fun. It was a really great training.
It really was. And just want to echo what you just said, the amazing training team that we have. They're not only skilled, but we have a great time together.
Except for that one guy.
We won't name names.
It was awesome. And we are very, very, very blessed to have a phenomenal and solid experienced training team. It's great.
Yeah, there's a lot of depth in the training team there. So just to all the training team members that are listening in, it was amazing. And the room was held so well. Participants really, really loved it. And it's big shout out to everyone on that team, holding the room well and doing such a great job.
Yes. And to our training team leader, shout out to Suzanne Barron,
Yeah,
who assembles it with such care. And she cares deeply about each person. So, yeah.
AKA Gumby.
Yeah.
Having to shift with all the changes that are happening constantly. So, yes.
Yeah.
Big ups to the entire team and Suzanne. You all are awesome.
Absolutely. So the reason why I share that is because we're going to take a little bit of a detour. And as happens, there's always endless questions at externship. People are trying to drink from the fire hose and try to somehow understand what they're drinking at the same time, which is really an impossible task. So as always, there's a parking lots questions that sometimes we get to them. Sometimes there's some leftovers. And so today we're taking a trip down parking lot lane. And we're gonna answer some of the parking lot questions from that externship across this episode. So
Great.
Y'all
Great
ready to
use of our
start?
time, I think. Yeah.
Roll them out.
Very good. Very good. Okay. So we're gonna move through some of these is like we'll move through it in a way that hopefully makes sense, from stage 1 questions into a stage 2, stage 3 self-of-therapist question, and a live session question at the end. All right. So this is a question we hear all the time, but with the pursuer-withdrawer dynamic, do you always have a more anxious partner and a more avoidant partner?
Should I kick us off?
There you go. Come on.
Go for it. Jump on in.
So that's the most common presentation. You have someone on the more pursuing end of the spectrum with someone on the more avoidant side of the spectrum. That's the most common pairing, but it absolutely is not the only pairing. You can have 2 avoidant folks. You can have folks that are a little more complex, like a fearful avoidant attachment style, showing up with another fearful avoidant attachment style. So you can have all kinds of complexity in the room. What I would say is that don't as often see withdraw couples, because for the most part, each partner is like, oh, we're good. No one's necessarily complaining or pursuing or getting really aggravated. And so the distress tends to be squashed down. So it's quieter. So you don't often see withdraw. And it's usually like an injury or something like that that'll bring a withdrawal, or a major life milestone. Like suddenly the kids have left the house and we're kind of looking at each other like we're strangers, and it's becoming a little more explicit how far apart we are. So that's kind of where I would start in my response to that. I don't know if you want to add anything.
It covers it pretty thoroughly. I know John Gottman did some research a while ago, and he said about 70% of, he called it marital conflict at the time, but partner conflict, was organized around a withdraw-pursue dynamic. And so there's this other 30% that we see sometimes, and it gets very confusing. So oftentimes if we're experiencing a lot of chaos and we can't quite understand what the cycle is, it's like picking up Mercury. It's not unusual to have a fearful avoidant strategy rearing its head that is very complex, and the cycle is very complex and plays out over time. And we do get withdraw couples occasionally, but the majority of the time we are working with a withdraw-pursue cycle, avoidant anxious strategies coming together.
Yeah, I'd agree. The next question was a bit of that, which was, what if both clients have an avoidant attachment? And the only thing I'll add to that is, whenever I do have a withdrawal, one of my first questions as I'm starting to suss this out is, has it always looked this way? Right? And then oftentimes I'll hear, well, like, no, it wasn't always this way. I used to get really upset. And as someone starts describing a more pursuing behavior, but that's when I start going, okay, we have a burnt out pursuer on our hands who is now presenting with a withdrawn partner, as a withdrawn partner. So you can ask, historically, has it always been this way, or did it look different? Did your arguments look different earlier in the relationship? And that can be a way to start to get a handle on what we're working with.
Exactly. Because by appearances, it looks like withdraw.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're sussing out, did something happen? Did something change? A reactive cycle.
So carrying on with attachment styles, one person was asking, can withdrawers and pursuers ever switch roles? Can a withdrawer suddenly start pursuing, and can a pursuer suddenly start withdrawing?
Well, dovetail off what you just said a second ago, right? When there's been a reactive cycle and pursuer gets to the point of saying, I want to stop putting my hand on that hot burner because it hurts every time I lean in and I don't get a response. So they start pulling away and start getting their needs met in other ways, hanging out with friends more, getting involved in activities. They start stepping off the dance floor. What often happens at a certain point is the withdrawn partner starts to notice and can get actually quite anxious or scared. And then they start showing up being the most accommodating partner ever, bringing coffee in the morning and showing up. But that's actually a reaction as well, because the core emotion there is fear that's not getting expressed, right? So if that person were to show up in a secure way, they say, this is scaring the heck out of me. I can't find you anymore, right? So at that point, they look different, and what appears on the surface is different. But our goal would be, of course, to help the partners move back to their original strategies of the original cycle. And that can take some work because they didn't get there randomly. So it's not that their core strategy changes, but there's a reaction, right?
I think the only other thing I would add to that is different relationships can pull for different strategies. So you can look at your own relationship history and say, gosh, I'm aware that in the current relationship, I'm really more prone to retreat and withdraw when in distress. Whereas in other relationships, perhaps I would have been more on the pursuing. Michael, you're laughing.
Why would I be laughing at yourself?
I look over and I see this like smirk on his face.
Yeah. She might be talking about a couple that we know.
What's
a friend of ours.
Yeah, a friend of ours. We've heard.
Rumor has it. Yeah.
In a sweet way, we would say we've loved each other into existence, and a part of our organic way of being was very hard to be at other junctures in our lives with different people. But we are a withdraw-pursue cycle, and Sil's a withdrawer. I'm a pursuer. And that is us in our...
There we go. But really all this to say,
change.
Yeah, you can change and think about your own relationship history and just notice the different contexts that maybe you become more pursuing, show up in a more pursuing strategy versus a more withdrawing strategy. And, I think it also speaks to, these are not fixed positions. These are not labels. We're not just put into a box, right? We all have the capacity to have all of the strategies at our disposal. It's just which is your primary go-to? What's your sort of resting place when in distress?
The only caveat I would add, because I think a lot of people, when they're learning the model, someone used this great phrase one time, there's no monolithic strategy, meaning withdrawers can have pursuing behaviors. They can get angry and lash out, and pursuers can pull away, right? But the reason I'm offering this caveat is because oftentimes people are working so hard to learn how to track a cycle, and they're saying, I think they have several cycles, and they change these positions. And that's actually not true, right? Within the relationship, there could be a reactive moment where, like you said, someone becomes a burned out pursuer, but their core strategy remains the same. The tricky thing is, if we're only evaluating strategies by behavior, we can really miss the boat about what the true strategy is. There are other ways of evaluating that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like in my most strident moments, I might walk into a room. I can remember this was years ago in grad school, but I remember I was really having a bad day, and I can walk through our like therapist room, like our confidential room, and I said nothing to nobody, nothing. And that's not normal if you've ever been in real life. But I said nothing to nobody. And I walked in, I put my keys down, and I walked right back out. And the room was full of people. Like my wheelhouse, right? Is a room full of people.
Yeah.
And then I go outside and I sit at these tables we had outside, and I sat there going, why is no one coming to look for me? What's happening? Like it was what everybody took as a signal of like, ooh, give Michael some space. It's like no, come find me. Right. So that's like that can happen sometimes. And I'm an ardent pursuer. I have years of pursuing very hard. But I can use a withdrawing strategy to see if someone will come and find me. Right. And that's very different. Or a withdrawer can use anger to push partner away and really say, like, I want distance here, and try to get their partner to go away with it.
Exactly. But like in the moment you were talking about, you're not a withdrawer because you were kind of pulling away, hoping people
That's
might
right.
come to you, right?
Right.
So let me ask you all, what do you do, or what did you do before maybe a lot of experience, if you did not know, if you had no clear withdrawer or pursuer? Like if you were really stuck and you're like, I don't know who's pursuer and who's withdrawer, and there's no clarity here for me.
So what did you do?
You're talking about with clients, right? Or are you
Yeah.
saying like with yourself? I couldn't tell the way you were asking that
Oh,
question.
wait, we actually met with clients. I met with clients. Well,
Well,
just
I think the thing I will say is it's rare that you have like all the data points line up perfectly
Mm.
to say, oh, this is a pursuer profile, or oh, this is a withdrawal profile. So you look at, after a handful of sessions, you look at how the data, if you will, hangs together. And you start to see trends and themes. And yes, you can have a withdrawer that gets angry and yells. And I know oftentimes we simplify to say that that's pursuery, to get angry and turn up the volume. So we can't use just one data point. But what you will usually see is after a handful of sessions and after really exploring meaning making and what people do in these moments and how they regulate their affect and how they manage the relationship, you start to see a trend in a certain direction, one or the other. Or again, it could be mixed with a fearful avoidance strategy, just a little more complex. But so that's what I would say. Just kind of look at how all of it hangs together when you look at people's sort of emotional profiles. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
For me, when I don't have a clear withdrawal pursuer, then that's where supervision comes in, or a peer review comes in. And I'll go, hey, here's this tape. We've done this many times in group. Michael, we've been doing group a long time. But I can remember lots of conversation of people saying, I really don't know what position they're taking. And the group kind of like looks at this together. And that kind of group hive mind kind of helps you start going, oh, yeah. Or, Michael, as the supervisor, will ask particular questions about, hey, what's happening? What's their background like? What's trauma? Is there trauma informing what's happening here? And that kind of talking about it with others that are looking at this can get the eyes on the work and go, this is getting more and more clear. So I would highly suggest, if you're really struggling with a particular client, reach out to some peers, have them get their eyes on it, or lean into your group.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
So that is great. And let people know listening to this that, sometimes it takes time and it's very fertile ground for the therapist, self-doubt to come up. Like I should be able to figure this out, and I get anxious. But the reality is we're looking at a comprehensive, like a circle, a cycle. And people are triggering one another and pulling each other into the dance. And if it's taking us a little while, it's okay to be patient. It's okay to figure it out, right? We're going to do our best to balance each person's emotional experience as we organize it and engage it. And it will come forward. We will get it in time. But I know this question is a great question because it makes like all of us anxious at first when we're learning the model, right?
Absolutely.
And I would also say we can't just take the action tendency.
Right.
Right, because you can have very quiet pursuers,
Mm.
right? And they can kind of look like withdrawers, but then you start to peek under the surface a little bit and you see a lot of preoccupation with closeness. And, so I just wanted to speak to that too. We can't just look at the tip of the iceberg to understand a person's position.
That's great.
Mm.
All right. Hey, everybody. This is Michael Preston. First of all, I want to say thanks to everyone for the incredible response to the first Tango Deliberate Practice group. From the time I did my EFT externship, what impressed me about EFT was the community's commitment to working on their own skills, even after grad school. The first Deliberate Practice group filled up faster than I expected, so I've decided to open another group that will start this March. It's open to EFT therapists everywhere. If you're new to EFT, consider this. The research shows that therapists don't automatically get better simply because of experience. In fact, many therapists show a decline in effectiveness over time. But improvement hinges on deliberate practice, self-reflection, seeking feedback, and supervision. So if you missed out on the first Deliberate Tango Practice group, or you just want to hone your skills as an EFT therapist, consider joining the Deliberate EFT Tango Practice group on the 2nd and 4th Thursday starting in March. Full details are available at www.michaelprestonlpc.com/tango. So let's carry on here. This is a very withdrawal specific question. And I understand where this person is coming from, because it can be much harder to read and see the emotion in a withdrawing client. So what are common secondary or surface emotions to look for in withdrawers? And if I think about this question a little bit, it's like, what are some common emotional conjectures you might offer a withdrawer as they're learning to kind of put their, even building a language for what's happening to them?
Those are two kind of different questions.
are.
So a secondary emotion, right, which isn't really about their core emotional experience. We see people numbness. We see people confused. There may be frustration. There may be annoyance. There may be anger, right?
Upset.
Exactly.
Stoicism,
Yeah.
that's outward appearance. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, the hard part, actually, we will see these things on the surface, but it's hard to be able to understand, if we follow that thread, what is going to be their core. It's harder with people with an avoidance strategy to help them move into a place they often don't have language for yet. Right.
Mhm.
So to move into the more core emotion, but the secondary emotion we will see on the surface,
Yeah.
and I think we just covered the range pretty nicely there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also when it's numb, confused, when they don't have, I think they'll just say, I don't know. And that's where I don't know a lot. So I don't know. It is often that confused, numb, frustrated, upset, but they, even in secondary, sometimes they're just like, I don't know.
Mhm.
Because
It's a lot of I don't knows.
a lot of I don't knows. And I know those are hard to tolerate for the therapist, because they're like, oh, it feels like hitting a wall, and then going, well, where do you go with I don't know? Right. And we know that we're swimming around in unknown territory for them.
Mhm.
Exactly. People are very patient there, right? Just take it slowly and join them and validate and bring them to the body. So often people can talk about body sensations before they can actually identify with clear language all the different nuances of their emotional world.
This is where I think it's always good to remind ourselves that, withdrawers, it's not that they're not having an emotional experience. It's an emotional experience that's under either tight control, or they have contact with it and it's confusing. And if you've had a lifetime of trying to get away from that and clamping that down, it's not going to be so readily available to speak
Right.
about it in any sort of coherent way.
You dropped the mic. That was good.
There you go.
There you go.
I think the podcast is done.
Well, not quite. We've got some more
No,
questions. So,
I'm kidding.
let's carry on. Here's a question as we move into, as we get into our work. It's a two-parter. So we'll start with part one, which is when partners seem to be able in session to go along with the process, lean in. There's these really lovely moments where they're both taking a new step in the dance, and they seem to be really holding it, but then they go home and they relapse back into their cycle. Are we expecting that? What do we do with that when they show back up and they're like, oh
Mhm.
man, we got into our cycle again? What do you do?
It never happens in my sessions.
One and done.
Yeah. It's predictable, right? Like
Yeah.
therapy starts in our office. It doesn't happen at home, and it can take a while. It's a complicated question to answer in that there can be so many variables for why that's the case, right? In terms of people's ability to internalize the model, people's ability to self-reflect, people's ability to kind of tolerate their emotional experience, people's ability to lean in. There are just so many different variables. And then we have a very safe container in the office that includes us with the Alliance to hold people so they can begin having an open channel and slowly but surely, at their own pace, gain, I guess, like muscle memory essentially through those reps. But it happens a lot. And again, this is another thing that makes a lot of therapists very anxious. Like they're doing great work at home, but they come in and it seems like everything's unraveled. And I would just like to say it's not unraveled. It just hasn't gotten to the place where they can fully hold it, internalize it, and tolerate the emotional experience in the moment of conflict yet without us in the room. So it can just take some time.
Yeah, it feels like I really do appreciate the question because this also is like breeding ground for I've done something wrong,
That's right.
as a therapist. I appreciate what you were just saying of like, oh, but this is predictable. They're in therapy for a reason, and it takes some time for all of this to be more internalized and integrated. So, what do you do, right? You kind of normalize that. And, sometimes, it's happened enough in my practice that sometimes, I won't say all the time, but sometimes I even kind of forecast it with clients.
Oh,
Like, I know that things have been really, really hard at home. And today you did something different. You took a really vulnerable step towards one another. This is really new. I just want to name that sometimes when you go home, you can feel pretty raw, and that can be kind of fertile ground for things to kind of come up again.
mhm.
And, just want to invite you to hold each other tenderly because this is pretty raw. So
Yeah.
sometimes I could forecast it gently.
Yeah. I'll echo that. I do. I'll say, hey, I'll say some version at the end. Just really love what you're doing. And just so you know, I won't be surprised if you come back next week and say we found ourselves in our cycle because that's a really normal part of the process.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that does alleviate people's distress when it happens to some level.
Yeah.
Right. But it normalizes.
Just
Okay,
normal
this
life.
happens.
Kind of
Right.
disarm the situation.
Yeah. So follow up to that, because it's a bit of a nuance net. We do expect people to get into their cycle. That's a very normal thing. But what happens when a partner who is going along with the process, but is using the vulnerable content in session and weaponizes it at home and it becomes like new fodder for the cycle and they throw the vulnerability back at their partner that they revealed in your session. How do you begin to address that with your couples?
Would unpack that very systemically. Like,
Mhm.
so when that happens, help me understand the impact that has on you and what it says. And people often bring up issues around safety in the therapy. It doesn't feel safe for me to be vulnerable in here. And so we'll unpack, process that and unpack that. I might even do some form of an enactment saying how difficult it is then to try to take risks in this therapy. And I would probably give a nod to it toward the end of the session. In a more psychoeducational way, just saying, to get to the more vulnerable and deep places that you all are going to in therapy is really, really hard work. It's also going to be the conduit for your connection ultimately.
Mhm.
And to really treat that as a real gift. So I would just really want to encourage anything that comes up in here. If there's more to talk about or question about it, we could bring it in here, but not to be used in a way that is to be ammo for a fight or anything like that. It'll put such a low ceiling on what we can accomplish together. Right.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. So you're making sort of explicit, kind of a boundary there. Like,
Right.
hey, that's really going to do harm to your process. I also like what you were just naming of being able to unpack that systemically, like impact that has. I would also be curious to go back into that moment when the vulnerability was used and weaponized. Like, help me
Mhm.
understand what happened there so that we can understand that as the action tendency because no one again kind of trusting that no one's kind of waking up and saying, "Ooh, how can I like really punch below the belt?" But clearly someone was in a lot of distress that they used the very thing that they're longing for to now hurt their partner.
Mhm.
And so what was going on? What gave rise to that? So I'd want to make some space to make sense of that moment. And maybe they were feeling frightened or overwhelmed or scared, desperate. And now we can start to organize and kind of humanize the moment, not condone it, but make sense of what gave rise to that. And we can literally do a tango around that.
Yeah.
and while honoring also the systemic element, the impact, and being able to talk about how painful that was for the receiving end, and also how that breeds a lot of unsafety moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. It's leaving space for finding the reasonable reason behind the unreasonable thing we're seeing.
Hmm.
And I think what just kind of pops up for me is like, part of me is frustrated with my client being like, this is like,
Totally.
really?
Yeah.
I'm kind of upset with you too, because you weaponized my work, right?
Yeah.
So I think we gotta probably deal with that, maybe a little bit of that part of you that could surface when someone weaponizes your work, and then lean in with that lovely curiosity that says, okay, I have to trust that something happened, that they didn't wake up thinking, how can I take, or they didn't leave session thinking, great, now I've got more ammo, right? They likely didn't. And I trust that. So something had to have happened.
Hmm.
Not to justify, but to make sense.
Exactly. Exactly. Like let's move in with curiosity. We don't want to shame that person while also, bringing it forward.
You can also underscore how that move creates the very thing that they're most afraid of or want the least, that their partner is going to shut down and pull away and not feel safe with them or
Right.
disengage, right? So that thing you're doing actually gets in the way of you getting the thing you're really wanting, which is more closeness, connection, understanding, whatever that might be, right?
Cool.
Uh, I'm sorry. I do want to add one more piece,
Please do.
which is, something that would be sort of a note to self of in the therapist role, seat is, this is also data for us to keep in mind of like, okay, so do I need to titrate vulnerability, and keeping that in mind moving forward of, not to say that, we need to completely stop and, keep it up on a surface level or anything like that. But we may need to titrate a little bit more the vulnerability depending on how much it's getting used outside of session in moments of escalation.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Do we shift how much we do until we know it's clearing up that action tendency isn't going to happen again?
Right.
Right.
Keep our
It's a
part,
great point.
another part in keeping it safe.
Yeah,
Exactly.
huge. All right. So we're going to round out our stage one questions, parking lot questions here,
Okay.
the last one, which is what happens when someone keeps throwing out the phrase, then let's get divorced or let's call the lawyer, right? They bring that big D word into the cycle. The question was very kind of specific. Like, is that a reason to stop treatment and help the couple with closure?
So, as with many EFT questions, it depends, right?
That's right.
It depends where we are in the process and what the person means. What's the function of that? What's the meaning of it? What's the context it's coming up in? So we were kicking this around a little bit, and oftentimes we look at it being a very predictable endpoint of somebody's emotional experience. We could use a different phrase for that, right? It's somebody's action tendency. When I feel this distressed or this powerless or this demoralized or this hopeless about our process, that's where I go, right? I will throw out the D word. And the truth of that can be enormously destabilizing for the partner and in the relationship, right? It's a thing that sometimes we could even say, I would really like you to be able to take that off the table, but we would want to understand where it comes from, right? So there would be a both and. There can also be, experiences where we even heard some version of that, like in an intake, that one partner says, I'm kind of 75% sure this isn't going to work, but I'm here. Like, I want to leave every stone unturned. And one thing that's very interesting, it almost like is the way I've thought about it, it's almost like EFT's version of discernment counseling, but it's experiential, is we'll make a few passes of moving into the cycle and working from an attachment place and organizing emotional experience and sending an enactment. And maybe the first couple times it goes okay, and we can even be encouraged. However, when a person is really done, and that's a phrase they've used, it gets to a point where they cannot tolerate that kind of attachment interaction. And they will often say, I really can't do this. Michael or Sil, I can't do this. There's nothing in me that wants to do this. And that's a very different moment, right? That is a moment that if we were going to do a couple more sessions with this partnership, that we would actually work more toward about how can we help people find a way to part, right? We're not going to do EFT and open up ability like that anymore. So it depends. It depends what the context and meaning and function of all of that is. There's a lot to that question, actually.
Yeah. If I can boil it down to simplify it, like not to oversimplify the moment, but it's like, is it reactive or is it deliberate? right? Is it a deliberate expression of where I am, or is it reactive and it's the end? I like that. It's the end point of my emotional experience. I just throw it at the
Mhm.
wall, right? So is it reactive or is it more deliberately helping me know where you are?
Yeah, that's a great question, though, 'cause
Mhm.
that's another one that's daunting
Yeah.
for a therapist, right? Oh my gosh, like, someone keeps saying they wanna get divorced. Does that mean it's game over here? And I would say more often than not, it doesn't. Much
Yeah.
more often than not, it doesn't.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Well, anything to add to that, or should we move on to stage two?
I think we can move on to stage 2.
Age 2,
All right.
boy.
Hey, everybody. This is Michael. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast. This was such a great conversation that we went a bit long. And instead of loading the whole episode for you all, hey, everybody. This is Michael. Hey, everybody. This is Michael. And thanks so much for tuning into today's episode. Because it was a long recording, we're going to break it into 2 episodes. So come back for the next episode where we pick up with stage 2 questions. Hey, everybody. This is Michael. Thanks for tuning into today's episode. Because it was such a long conversation, we decided to break it up into 2 episodes. So come back next time for the continuation of externship parking lot questions about stage 2 and self of the therapist.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast. We hope this podcast is an encouragement to your EFT journey, bringing clarity and understanding of EFT to your work. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcast to stay up to date with each new episode. To learn more about training or supervision opportunities with Michael Barnett, go to michaelbarnettlpc.com. With Dr. Silvina Irwin, go to drsilvinairwin.com. And with Michael Preston, go to michaelprestonlpc.com. Tune in again next time to hear more of this great conversation.